Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the What the Finance podcast, where we talk to experts to help gain a greater understanding about what is happening in the world of finance, investing, markets, and economics. On today's podcast, I'm happy to be hosting Salman Anees Soz, an economist, author, and commentator. He is currently adjunct professor at the Anwar Gagash Diplomatic Academy in the Abu Dhabi, and is also a senior consultant at the World Bank. So I hope I pronounced all that correctly, but Salman, thanks for joining the podcast today. And can you talk a little bit more about yourself and your background and maybe how you've gotten to where you are today?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. It's good to talk to young people. It reminds me of my earlier days. So, of course, I come from India and grew up there. And after my bachelor's, decided to move to the States. So I did my degree in economics at Northeastern University in Boston. Then somehow I was, trying to figure out whether I should do a PhD or I should just maybe go for an MBA. Then I took a bit of a break and went to the World Bank instead to work for a few years. And then I said, okay, I'm going to do my MBA. I went to Yale. I did my MBA and then joined the private sector, around the dot-com boom times, boom bust, I guess. And from there, I went back to the World Bank and spent a lot of time there. And then said, okay, I'm now going to move somewhere else. So I moved back to India, joined politics, and I remain a member of India's main opposition party, the Congress Party. I actually am the deputy chairman of the All India Professionals Congress, which is the professionals arm, I guess, of the Congress Party. And I'm also now, I continue to consult for the World Bank. And after I left the World Bank and was in India, I started writing my first book, and that was done. And now my second book on India just came out last November, I think. So I don't know, I got into writing opinion pieces, writing books. I never thought I'd be doing that. And now I'm here as your guest to talk about India and India's economy.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you're with the World Bank for quite a while. So I guess,
yeah.
Can you explain maybe what they actually do? Because I think we hear it, but it's sometimes hard to know. And I guess what you've learned while you're working there.
So the World Bank, the World Bank Group, works both with governments and with the private sector, depending on which arm of the World Bank group you're talking about. I spent my time mostly in the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is the bank that was formed initially just in around late 1940s, I think. The World War II had just finished. Europe needed reconstruction. The World Bank came in handy at that time. The World Bank and the IMF are sister organizations. Both are part of the UN system, but they're autonomous institutions. They're owned by governments. And the World Bank does lend money to governments and gives grant money to governments, but doesn't deal directly with the private, doesn't deal directly with individual borrowers, for example. People ask me sometimes, can we get a loan? No, not from the World Bank. But the World Bank's focus is on economic development. And economic development, the concept of economic development has really expanded in the last 50, 60 years. So initially it was a lot more on infrastructure and core economics, but now it's pretty much everything. Now it's climate change, it's social development, it's health, it's education. And it's not a traditional bank per se. So we do a lot of policy work, a lot of knowledge work, a lot of partnerships. Just trying to make sure that there are fewer poor people on the planet and there's more prosperity on the planet. We try to do that. So, but working at an intergovernmental level.
Yeah, and I think, I guess you hear about lots of IMF loans and lots of, I'm guessing the World Bank's involved with that. And a lot of it's not just giving these countries the money, it's actually trying to help them better plan for the future. So maybe in the future, they might not need to come back to the World Bank and IMF.
That's exactly right. So the IMF is a different animal altogether. The IMF is the lender of last resort for countries.
Okay.
So if a country gets into a very bad economic crisis and needs financial support, then they can turn to the IMF. And so the IMF takes the lead at that time. And the World Bank will come in also, maybe to help in other ways. But the primary kind of crisis manager for the international economy is the IMF. And you will see, the many countries, even countries that you would not think would need that kind of support, some European countries or maybe some giants in Asia, they also have to turn to the IMF every now and then. So the two agencies work together a lot, just so that for some of our borrowers, we don't want them to get into an unsustainable debt situation. So they have to coordinate, collaborate, but they do work together. But their mandates are different.
Yeah, and I guess we've seen, unfortunately, an example at the moment, Sri Lanka, that maybe has gotten to that point where it's really hard, especially in these increasing interest rate times, really hard for them to actually roll over a lot of that debt and to keep going.
Sri Lanka, is going through a very difficult time, but that's hopefully they'll come out of it soon. But they'll need help, and I'm sure they'll get the help they need.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned the book there, and you've written a few books, and your most recent one, I think, was released last year, called Unshackling India: The Hard Truths and Clear Choices for Economic Revival. So maybe can you tell us a bit more about what was your influence for writing the book?
Okay, so I wrote the book with a friend of mine, Ajay Chimber, who is a former World Bank person, but we had never met when we were at the World Bank. And he held very senior positions at the World Bank and at the UNDP, the United Nations Development Program. And we were introduced by a mutual friend. And during the pandemic, we played a little golf because there's nothing to do. And our conversations were about India and where India was headed, what needed to be done. And in the process, while talking, he had actually reviewed my first book, and he had liked it. He liked the style. And so then we got talking, and we said, maybe we should just write a book. And that's what we proceeded to do. And so this is a pandemic baby, this particular book. But it's obviously, it's focused more on the policy side. It's not a political, even though I'm a politician myself, or at least a part-time politician. But the book is fairly apolitical because we thought that given the challenges India faced or faces, continues to face, we had to come out with something that was credible and was not biased by our political views to the extent that is possible. So yeah, we wrote it literally during the pandemic, and it came out in November last year.
Yeah, great. And I guess for people who maybe, obviously they know about India, but they might not know about the intricacies of the economy and how it works. Can you maybe explain a bit more about the Indian economy for people who might not have as much experience in the country?
Well, obviously it's a very big, diverse country, and the economy is also pretty big. So I would say if you just look at the gross domestic product or economic output, I think right now India is probably the 5th or the 6th largest economy in the world in current dollar terms. But if you look at India in per capita terms, it's much poorer. India's per capita income, per capita GDP, rather, is about roughly $2,000, in comparison to, say, the US, which is about $60,000 to $65,000. China is at about $10,000 to $11,000 per capita. So that gives you a sense of, obviously the Chinese economy is the biggest, but on a per capita basis, it's much poorer than the American economy, but it's much wealthier than the Indian economy. So that's where you situate India. Big total economy, but on a per capita basis, a relatively poor country. If you had to use the World Bank's classification, which is the standard classification, India is considered a lower middle income country, and it would gain upper middle income country status at about $3,500, I think, roughly. And China is at the cusp of becoming a high income country. It's considered an upper middle income country at about $10,500 per capita. And once it crosses over to about 11,500 to 12,000, China is going to become considered a high income country. Pretty much all of Western Europe is considered high income. Canada, Japan, Korea, Singapore, Australia, your own country. So those are high income countries. But India has a long way to go. Now, India's economy remains, if you divide the economy in its traditional areas of agriculture and industrial production and services, the biggest chunk comes from services. Agriculture has a declining share in the total output. It's about anywhere from 13 to 17%, depending on the definition. The industrial sector has not really done that well in India, but is the second biggest by output. But the biggest employer is agriculture, which goes to its low productivity kind of state. So that's like the broad brush of the Indian economy. Of course, we can get into different aspects of it.
Yeah, so I guess if we look back over the past 20 years, maybe longer, has it mainly been people from agriculture going to services? Has that really been where the growth has occurred in the economy?
Well, people have actually exited agriculture, but not at the rate that we would like to see. And the reason they're not exiting at the rate that we'd like to see is because there are not enough opportunities in the rest of the economy. And that is the big challenge for India. Now, India has done relatively well in terms of its poverty reduction efforts. So I would say in the 10 years from 2006 to 2016, roughly, give or take, India, brought about 140 million people out of poverty, maybe more. That's a huge number whose basics have improved to the extent that they're not officially classified as poor. However, the big problem in India and in other countries, in many other countries around the world, but especially in India, is this phenomenon of jobless growth. The economy is growing, but it's not creating sufficient number of jobs. And that is India's enduring challenge. And if that is not tackled, I think it's going to be a huge problem. Now, one way to look at so there's a concept of labor force participation rate. I'm not sure if you are aware. So so there are two rates that people look at. One is the unemployment rate. So unemployment rate is basically how many people are looking for jobs, or how many people are employed. That becomes your labor force. Of those people who are looking for jobs, or how many are unemployed, that gives you a rate. But then you're only looking at your labor force. The problem in India is not that the unemployment rate is high. In poor countries, you don't really typically have high unemployment rates. Why? Because everybody has to earn something to live, basically. To not work is a luxury to some extent. So rates in India right now are maybe 7-8%, which are still historically high rates. But if you look at some European countries, maybe the unemployment rates are much higher. But the real problem is participation in the economy. And now in India, the labor force participation rate is roughly 40% or so. And then if you look at the same data for, say, a country like China, It's at about 55-60%. If India had to reach the global average of labor force participation, as in people looking for jobs and people who are in jobs, etc., India needs then, just to reach the global average, India needs to create 180 million jobs right now. That's more than half the size of America. That kind of job creation. And that just tells you how big the challenge is. And then with automation, with these new technologies coming up, we don't really know how it's going to pan out and what kind of hit the job market is going to take. But that's we're not even thinking about that right now. We're just saying that right now, if India were to aspire to not being a world beater, but just be a global average, then we would need 180 million jobs that we don't have right now. And a part of the reason for this is women are not in the labor force. Women are just, we don't participate. Our participation rates for women are similar to those in Iraq, which has gone through such turmoil, right? So women are not working. They don't have opportunities. Maybe they don't feel safe. Maybe they have social constraints. So labor force participation for women is about anywhere from 10 to 20%. Now, China is at 60%. Can we compete with China? If so few women are working, we cannot compete with China. Not with these numbers. So that is why we have to do something about it. So this is an ongoing problem, and we've not been able to resolve it.
Yeah, that's an amazing statistic that, close to 200 million people, you need close to 200 million more jobs to really reach that stage. Right now. Yeah, right now, not into the future with.
Not in the future, no, right now.
And I think you posted something on Twitter where looking at youth unemployment as well in India and China and how high it was. So I guess that's another concern going into the future.
Yeah, I think it was Kaushik Basu who talked about youth unemployment. And then I posted something that, look, youth unemployment rate is, yes, it's a problem, but look at the participation rates in the labor force for youth in India and China, right? So what that tells you is that people are not even part of the labor force, because unemployment rates are calculated on, with the labor force in the denominator. But you have high unemployment rates, but that unemployment is basically ratio is based on a much smaller denominator.
Yeah, so it would be bigger if you included people who weren't even participating.
If you include people, then it'd be like, it's crazy. I mean, that's why I know people look at unemployment rates and they think that's the totality of it. That's not, at least in India's case, it's not the totality of it. And that's why we should present both sides, both the unemployment rate and also the participation in the labor force rate. So that's why I had posted that.
Yeah, well, just hearing that, it sounds like a massive challenge for the economy to overcome. Are there any other challenges that I guess? If you want to talk about them.
Let's think about it. I mean, what is the future going to look like, right? I mean, what is this new economy that everybody's talking about? What will it require? It'll certainly require, if nothing else, let's assume that it requires nothing else, but at least it requires a good education. It requires good healthcare, so that you grow up healthy and are able to comprehend things, right? I mean, why do we focus so much on early childhood development? Now, these are not sexy things, right? Oh, early childhood, primary school education, primary healthcare. These are not sexy things, but these are foundational things. Without these, you ain't going anywhere. Now, I remember vividly, 1992, okay, maybe 93. So I'm in St. Stephen's College, where I went for my bachelor's degree in Delhi. and I came across this statistic on malnutrition in India. It was at about 40%. 40% of Indian children in 1992-93 were malnourished. They still are at that level, pretty much, after all these years. Now, what does malnourishment do? What does stunting do? What it does is that your brain development is not how it should be. Because you don't have the right nutrition, your brain is not developing in a way that would allow you to be a very productive citizen in the future. So if you see numbers like 40% malnutrition rate, then you should know that no matter what kind of health and education you have, your adult population at some point will not be as good, productive as it could be. So that's the first thing. Then you add to it this second problem of very poor education outcomes. Now, I don't know if you know this, but I can share with you some interesting data. This is for people who follow India. We know about all this stuff, but in 2018, the World Bank's World Development Report was on learning, education. And according to that report, but this report is based, the data is based on work done in India by a non-governmental organization, which has data going back to many, many years. So grade 2 students who could not read a single word of a short text, okay? Grade 2 students who could not read a single word of a short text. In our book, we present this table where Malawi is at about roughly 88%. India is at 83, 84%. That means over 80% of your grade 2 students cannot read a single word of a short text. India's grade 2 students who could not perform a 2-digit subtraction, 83, 84%. Worse than Iraq, worse than Malawi, worse than Kenya, Nicaragua, Ghana, Uganda. In reading, India's fared worse than Ghana, Uganda, Zambia, Yemen, Nepal, Iraq, Morocco, Liberia, Tanzania, Jordan, many others. But without education, no country has a shot at doing well in the future, much less a country that is at about $2,000 per capita GDP. So that focus has to be there. So the education outcomes, health outcomes, very important. Nutrition outcomes, very, in your world of finance and investment banking and venture capital and all that, private equity, these things may not mean anything. But I can tell you that all of what you're working on, Anthony, it requires a foundation. And the foundation comes from health and education, investments in health, education, and nutrition. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You can build all the bridges that you want, you can build all the roadways that you want, and the metros and whatever. But ultimately, or data parks and solar system, these solar parks and whatnot. But ultimately, modern economies are going to be about how solid the foundation is, your health and education, and your nutrition. And that's where India is not doing well. So it's a great concern for people like me. It's a great concern for people who really care about countries like India.
And why hasn't this changed? I guess that's a massive question, but.
In fact, I was discussing this very issue with somebody else just before I started talking to you. I think, improving health and education outcomes, these are long-term things. They don't happen quickly. They don't happen within an election cycle, or at least don't see major change during an election cycle. So politicians find it easier to do other things like give people money for this and that, and just throw money at a problem. Let's give you maybe a cash transfer this, cash transfer for that. Maybe you're a farmer, we'll give you this. Maybe we'll subsidize your, we'll give you free food, or we'll subsidize your food. Those are easy to do. They do improve your welfare, clearly. They are important. They have a place and they're needed. But there's disproportionate focus on that, because I think that helps politicians with political power. But the real contribution would be, to my mind, health education. So you need visionary people, you need emancipated people to kind of to tell people that, look, this is where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck, but it'll take some time. But we need to make these investments. I mean, the redwood forest in California did not just grow overnight. The Amazon did not come up, in a matter of a few months or a few years. These things take time. If you want, and by Amazon I meant the forest, not the company, and even the company took a while to come up. So, we had to prioritize this. If you prioritize this, and the developed world, whether it's Europe, America, Australia, everybody, Japan, they all know it. Korea, they know the value of education. They know the value of healthcare. That is why they invest so much in it. Poor countries feel that sometimes they feel that their focus is on hard infrastructure a lot more than it is on soft infrastructure, social infrastructure, which is things like health and education. But there's studies upon studies that show the value of health and education as foundational elements for modern economies. But somehow it's not easy sometimes to convince politicians.
Yeah, I guess the challenge as well, you mentioned how many people they've brought out of poverty as well. So it's that challenge between balancing that as well as the health and education. So because there's so many issues, I guess, to overcome in most economies and countries.
That is true. Absolutely true.
Yeah, definitely. So what change, I guess, it's talked, the book's Unshackling India. So what changes do you think are needed? You mentioned education, health, all those other things. Is there anything else that?
Obviously, there are lots of things, but if I had to, there are a couple of areas that are of particular interest to me. Of course, when you're writing with somebody else, everybody's pet topics make it to the book. My one big thing for India is more decentralization. So, if you look at India as a country of 1.4 billion people, and poor and all this, it seems like it's like an impossible task to govern this country. But what we probably want to do is to say, look, we have states, we have districts, we have village level kind of zones. We've got to devolve power and finances, and we need to kind of think small. We want as much power at the local community level as possible, because they know best what is needed for them. If we create a system where people take responsibility for their own development, then it won't be like an India-sized problem. Right now, we're looking at everything as an India-sized problem. But India is a very diverse country, and it cannot have one solution. Now, some states may be really advanced as far as education is concerned. Their problems will be different. They should be free to, focus on those. Then we're at least relieved that in some areas we don't have that problem. Maybe they have some other problem. So till we decentralize more, till we get away from seeking solutions in New Delhi all the time, as happens, till then, I think we are going to be in trouble. So I think one big theme in the book is, and this is something that we talk about a lot, and again, plenty of evidence from around the world that decentralized governance is extremely important. right? And you really must unshackle in some ways. But it's hard for politicians to give up power, right? But it's very important. For a country like India, I don't see any way for India to do well without decentralizing its governance structure. Think small, take Singapore-sized kind of areas and start developing them. Think Singapore. Singapore is what? I don't even know how many people live there. Maybe 6.5 million people. And some of our states. One state in India has almost 200 million people. It's just not conducive to good governance in that sense, or to good, proper economic development. So to the extent possible, we've got to go small. So that's one. The other thing is, I worry a lot about climate change for a country like India, because poor countries are going to suffer a lot. But India is going to be one of those countries that are going to suffer because of where India is located, what kinds of problems we're already seeing. I think there's a real danger that living standards can fall, even below where we are. And in some parts of India, it's definitely going to happen, I think. So we've got to plan now. So we have real headwinds, right? I mean, we have our challenges, which are already immense. And then there is this freight train heading towards us. And that is going to be a huge problem. Fortunately, there is, I think, recognition that this is going to be a challenging thing for India in particular. And there are steps that are being taken to kind of mitigate some of this. But I think we really have to think very differently about climate change. And actually, if you think about climate change and some of the newer technologies that are available to us now, the whole technology architecture seems to be changing around the world. If we could somehow marry that, the two, maybe there is an opportunity for India to kind of, have its moonshot, so to speak, right? You suddenly, out of nowhere, you have an opportunity to leapfrog because you just give up on a lot of stuff that you don't think is going to be useful for the future, and you just focus your investments in such a way that you know that you're going to deal with climate change. You have all these technologies coming up. Can you somehow marry the two and come up with something that this is at a conceptual level, but that's where we need to think a lot more. And by the way, and some things are not that complicated to do. Some things where you don't even need a lot of technology. For example, another favorite topic of mine is a new approach to urban infrastructure. Because of climate change, urban areas that have a lot of concrete are going to, they're going to suffer from massive heat waves, right? There's something called the heat island effect, and that's going to be very problematic for urban areas. Why don't we build what we call green infrastructure? Have these programs kind of where you employ people to develop green areas in cities, and these can be massive projects. Now, these will obviously have a return in the long term because they're helping you deal with climate change. But in the short term, you're creating employment, and you're doing things. You're in some ways creating more sustainable cities. That's what many of the wealthier countries are doing. You could do it too, and you have cheap labor, which doesn't have any opportunity right now. So I'm not saying that there's a magic bullet here, but there are things that can be done. The world's knowledge is available to us, right? There's so much knowledge that is available. We just have to go and get it and use it and adapt it to our circumstances. But I don't see, unfortunately, I don't see that vision right now. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it changes. But right now, I don't see that vision. There's no story that India wants to tell the world, I think, as of now. It should. It's an old kind of civilization, very diverse, very interesting. but not living up to its potential, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge most countries have, where the politicians only have 3 or 4 years, and then they have to try and get re-elected. So for them, it's very focused on short term rather than, as you mentioned, what's needed, which is that long term vision of trying to help progress the countries.
Yes.
It's very challenging. And yeah, from my research, one of the major things that you mentioned there is bureaucracy. So it seems like India has just lots of red tape and ridiculous bureaucracy. So that would be a thing to look at and to try and improve with decentralization.
I think bureaucracy, it does get a bad name. Of course, I mean, the bureaucracy, the way it came about, I think it was needed at a time when India had very limited state capacity. Its origins are in India's independence, because once the British left, we didn't really have a lot of educated people, didn't have a lot of people who had experience in government. So obviously things became very centralized and all that. Yes, bureaucracy is a problem, but at the same time, if you create structures that help you hold people accountable, then you can see progress. Now, to my mind, and again, you may think that I'm like a broken record, but if people at the community level or the local level are empowered, they will hold officials accountable, because they're in the best position to judge whether things are going right or wrong or not. That is why it's imperative. Decentralization is imperative, because it'll have many other benefits, including perhaps a more responsive bureaucracy. Right now, the way the bureaucracy functions, especially at the local level, is that you have this overlord. They're bosses. They have all the perks. They decide everything, and the sovereigns, people, are basically like supplicants, saying, "Please give me this, give me that. Can I have this?" So, which to my mind is hugely problematic in a democracy. I think we've empowered the officials far more. There's a reason they're called public servants. Their job is to serve the public interest, but that is not how it works. Maybe I'm being idealistic, but that's the way it should be. That is the way it can be. But for that, we have to kind of take power to the people, give them power, empower people, and let them do what is best for them. We don't know. I mean, I'm sitting somewhere, and I'm not going to be able to decide the fates of people. That's not the way it should be. So, as close to where people are, that's where the accountability should be as well. Responsibility, accountability.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the challenges are, it's a very rural-based country. Lots of people live in the rural parts, which I guess has been hard for a lot of the health and education infrastructure that you're saying. So maybe technology, implementing that through, internet, through balloons or whatever, can really help increase a lot of the challenges that have been very hard to tackle over the past 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, technology can certainly be very helpful in many of these areas. I see great potential for technology in health, technology in education. But you've got to get the governance models right, because if you are a country where government is all powerful, and then the government doesn't really do a good job, then you have the worst of all possible worlds, right? So if the government is all powerful and is doing a really good job, then as a citizen, you'll say, okay, you know what? I've made my bargain with the devil. The government is strong. It's okay, but at least they're doing things right. But if you have a bad government and it is powerful, then that's not good. And right now, I feel that the governments in India are relatively powerful. At the same time, they don't perform that well, and I think that is a disservice to the people of India.
Yeah, and even if they are doing well, once it turns the other way, people will turn on them very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So Salman, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I really appreciated your time and really learned quite a lot. So just my last question, what is one message that you'd like listeners to take away from our conversation and maybe even your book as well?
Well, I certainly don't want people to think that India is a lost cause, and the challenges are immense and nothing's going to happen. The reason we write, the reason we talk about these things is because we advocate for change, for reforms. And if you keep doing it, ultimately things do change, and we do have reform movements. So there's a lot of potential in India, as far as I can tell. And for people who are outside India, friends of India who care about India, what I would say is that keep pushing India to do better. And that's what friends do. You push your friends to do better. And in the meantime, people like myself will keep writing, keep talking about things, and hopefully we will make a difference.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully, things will change for the better in all places, I guess, is the main thing. So, Salman, thanks again. And obviously, we've mentioned your book, which is available on Amazon and other platforms. If anyone wanted to keep up to date with maybe your work, where would the best places for that be?
My website, salmansoz.com. That's there, and my books are there, and my articles show up there. And from my website, people can also get in touch with me, just like you did, Anthony.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. I'll put that all in the description below. And your Twitter is also very, I find it very insightful. So I'll put that in the description below. But yeah, Salman, thanks again.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and click the bell icon so you are notified when new podcasts are released. I hope you're leaving with some great value about investing, trading, and finance. See you on the next show.